Okay, let me put it this way. So in the tradition of Harry Houdini, who took his name from Robert Houdin, I am in that tradition, but I am taking it back to a previous incarnation of that tradition. Because Robert Houdin famously said that a magician is an actor playing the part of a magician. Which is to say, or what he was saying, was that he was an entertainer. He was an entertainer, and he was not actually somebody who dealt with the supernatural realm. He was just somebody who pretended to as part of his act. And that's the tradition that Harry Houdini was in, and that's the tradition that Harry Houdini's friend Al Baker, the inventor of many little tricks, was a contemporary of Houdini and was my great-grandfather. Al Baker had a daughter, and J. Marshall, the magician, married Al Baker's daughter, who's my grandmother. And so I'm in that tradition just by birth, which is ironic because my inclination takes that whole tradition back to its previous incarnation, which is a guy named John Dee, or a type of guy named John Dee. So John Dee was the British court magician for real. He was not a court jester. He was not an entertainer. He was the court magician, which meant he was the liaison to the spirit world, essentially. And so when Robert Houdin says a magician is an actor playing the part of a magician, well, who do you base this part off of? Well, you base it off of somebody like John Dee. And he was basically ultra-learned for his day, even for our day. He was an ultra-learned person, similar to Swedenborg, who was also ultra-learned and also spoke with spirits. Well, here we are in a worldview or a philosophy called Neo-Swedenborgianism, which looks at that whole, they're delving into the spirit world and looks at it as a point of view on one's own psyche. The idea is that Swedenborg was in his own head. To say, like the skeptics, this is all started with a skeptic saying, oh, it's all in their head. So you say, well, what Swedenborg wrote was all in his head? Yes, it's all in his head. Well, that's kind of interesting because Swedenborg was an anatomist and a physiologist before he had this religious conversion. And if it's all in his head, well, that means that all this religious stuff that he wrote about actually fits under the subset of physiology, right? This is a scientific observation of the human psyche in the first person. Okay, so it's really quite profound. So you can say that Swedenborg continued being an anatomist and a physiologist, and that the religious writings were all an expression of that. Because it's all in his head. If it's in his head, well, then now you know where it is, and when it is. And if it's in its head, it's neurophysiology. So anyway, we're going back to that time when people spoke to spirits. So the magician now is again the liaison between the physical and the supernatural world. But it's taken this whole new step with this whole map of the Van Allen belts. The map of the Van Allen belts, as I've said, matches the map of the spirit world printed in 1917. So we're liaisoning with this spirit world, but we're just assuming that it's part of our own physiology. It's not out there. How did J. Hewitt Mackenzie, the big question in Neo-Swedenborgianism, is how did J. Hewitt Mackenzie get these accurate readings, these accurate numbers for this place? Well, because he was in his own self, right? This is part of your own physiology as humans. It's something we share as humans.